Nothing says happy anniversary, quite like watching your wife flirt with another man while you're still sitting at the table. But that's exactly what I was doing on what should have been the most romantic night of our year. My name is Arthur Jensen, and I'm a 42-year-old graphic designer who apparently married a woman with the emotional depth of a puddle and the loyalty of a mercenary. Serena Stone, yes, she kept her maiden name, which should have been my first red flag, was currently giggling like a schoolgirl at something her best friend, Evan Miller, had whispered in her ear. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Arthur, you're not listening, Serena said, her voice carrying that particular tone that meant I was about to be publicly humiliated. Evan was just telling us about his new promotion at the event planning company. He's making 6 figures now. I took a sip of my overpriced wine and smiled. Congratulations, Evan. Must be nice to finally afford your own dinner instead of letting other people's husbands pick up the tab. The comment landed like a brick through a window. Evan's smug expression faltered for just a moment before he recovered with that practiced laugh of his, the one that sounded like a rusty gate swinging in the wind. Oh, Arthur's just being modest, Serena jumped in quickly. He's doing fine with his little graphic design business. Little graphic design business. There it was, the casual dismissal that had been building for months, delivered with surgical precision in front of the one person whose opinion seemed to matter more to her than her own husband's feelings. Evan leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine like he was some kind of sommelier instead of a glorified party planner who probably learned everything he knew about wine from Google. You know, Serena, I keep telling you that you should come work for our company. Someone with your organizational skills and charm would be perfect for client relations. I watched my wife's face light up like a Christmas tree. Really? You think I could handle corporate clients? Are you kidding? You'd be amazing. Plus, the starting salary is probably double what you're making at that museum gift shop. And there it was. The moment I realized I was watching my marriage dissolve in real time, right here in Cleveland's most expensive steakhouse, while a waiter named Matt hovered nearby, pretending not to eavesdrop on our domestic drama. That sounds incredible, Serena gushed. I mean, I love working at the museum, but the pay is just terrible, Evan finished for her. Honestly, I don't know how you two manage on Arthur's income and your part-time wages. I set down my wine glass with deliberate care. We manage just fine. Thanks for your concern. Of course you do, Evan said, but his tone suggested otherwise. I just think Serena deserves better opportunities, you know? She's got so much potential. The implication hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Serena deserved better opportunities. Serena deserved more money. Serena deserved more than what she had with me. My wife was nodding along enthusiastically, completely oblivious to, or maybe just completely comfortable with, the fact that her anniversary dinner had turned into a job interview conducted by another man who was clearly more interested in her than any legitimate employment opportunity. I should probably use the restroom, I announced, standing up from the table. Don't be long, Serena said without looking at me. Evan was about to tell us about his new condo downtown. Of course he was. I walked toward the back of the restaurant, past the restrooms, straight to Matt the waiter who was polishing glasses at the service station. Excuse me, I said, pulling out my wallet. I need to settle my portion of the bill. Matt looked confused. Sir, your table hasn't asked for the check yet. I'm asking now. Just my portion. I counted out $60, enough to cover my meal, my share of the wine, and a generous tip for Matt, who seemed like a decent guy caught in the middle of someone else's marital breakdown. Give them the rest of the bill when they're ready. And Matt? Yes, sir? When they ask where I went, tell them I said, congratulations on the new job and the new condo. Matt's expression shifted from confusion to understanding. He'd clearly seen this movie before. "I'll make sure they get the message, sir." I walked out the back exit into the Cleveland night air, my phone already buzzing with text messages before I'd even reached my car. "Where did you go?" "Arthur, this is embarrassing. Come back right now. Evan had to pay for dinner. How could you do this to us? Us? That was rich." I sat in my car for a moment, watching the messages pile up, each one more frantic than the last. Then I did something I should have done months ago. I blocked both Serena's and Evan's numbers, started the engine, and drove home to my modest apartment where I could finally think clearly for the first time in weeks. The next morning brought 17 voicemails, 43 text messages from numbers I didn't recognize, and a pounding headache that felt like someone was using my skull for drum practice. Serena had apparently enlisted her entire social network in an attempt to reach me, which would have been touching if it weren't so obviously motivated by embarrassment rather than genuine concern. I was sitting at my kitchen table, drinking coffee that tasted like regret and scrolling through the digital evidence of my wife's meltdown when my sister Maggie called. "So I heard you finally grew a spine," she said, without preamble. Maggie had never been one for small talk, which was one of the many reasons I preferred her company to most people's. Word travels fast. "Serena called me at 6 this morning, crying about how you abandoned her at some fancy restaurant. She seemed more upset about the bill than about you leaving." I laughed, but it came out bitter. "That sounds about right. Arthur, can I ask you something?" "Shoot." "Why did you stay with her this long?" It was a fair question. Maggie had been asking variations of it for the past 2 years, ever since Serena had started making comments about my lack of ambition and my small-town mentality at family gatherings. My sister worked as a bartender at a dive bar downtown and had probably seen more genuine human emotion in a single shift than Serena had displayed in our entire marriage. "I guess I kept thinking things would get better," I said. "That she'd remember why she married me in the first place. And why did she marry you?" Another fair question that I didn't have a good answer for. "I honestly don't know anymore." "Well, for what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. That Evan guy sounds like a real piece of work. You know about Evan?" Maggie was quiet for a moment. "Arthur, everyone knows about Evan." The words hit me like a physical blow. Everyone knows. How long had I been the only person in Cleveland who didn't realize my wife was having an emotional affair, or maybe more than emotional, with her so-called best friend? "How long?" I asked. "Does it matter?" "It matters to me." Maggie sighed. "I started hearing rumors about 6 months ago. Sarah from the museum mentioned seeing them having lunch together every week, always sitting on the same side of the booth. Lots of touching and whispering. She thought it was weird." 6 months. I'd been living in a fool's paradise for half a year while my wife conducted her relationship with another man in broad daylight. "I should have told you sooner," Maggie continued. "But I kept hoping I was wrong, or that you'd figure it out on your own." "No, you did the right thing. I wouldn't have believed you anyway." After I hung up with Maggie, I called my old college buddy Paul Tran, who happened to be one of the best divorce lawyers in Cleveland. We'd kept in touch over the years, mostly through occasional beers and complaints about our respective career paths. "Arthur, good to hear from you. What's going on? I need legal advice, and probably a drink." "That bad, huh? Come by the office this afternoon. We'll talk." Paul's law office was everything mine wasn't. Sleek, professional, expensive-looking. His secretary offered me coffee in actual china cups instead of the chipped mugs I used at home. Success looked good on him. "So?" Paul said, settling behind his massive desk. "Tell me everything." I gave him the full story. The anniversary dinner, Evan's obvious interest in my wife, the job offer that sounded more like a proposition, and my dramatic exit that had apparently left them stuck with a $300 dinner bill. Paul listened without interruption, occasionally jotting notes on a legal pad. When I finished, He leaned back in his chair and smiled. "You know what I like about this situation?" he said. "There's something to like about it. You left them with the bill. That was brilliant. Completely legal, totally justified, and absolutely humiliating for both of them. I wasn't trying to be brilliant. I was just angry. Sometimes anger makes us smarter than we think we are." Paul flipped through his notes. "Now, let's talk about protecting your assets. Do you have joint bank accounts?" "2 checking accounts and a savings account." "Any major purchases planned? Vacations, cars, anything like that?" I thought about it. Serena mentioned wanting to go to Europe this summer. Said Evan had recommended some places. Of course he had. "Here's what we're going to do," Paul said, pulling out a fresh legal pad. "First, you're going to withdraw your half of everything from those joint accounts and open new accounts at a different bank. Today. Right now, actually. Is that legal?" "Completely legal. It's your money. Second, you're going to document everything. Every text message, every voicemail, every interaction with both of them. Third, you're going to let me handle any formal communication about divorce proceedings." "You think it's going to come to that?" Paul gave me a look that was equal parts sympathy and amusement. "Arthur, it already has come to that. You just haven't admitted it yet." He was right, of course. The marriage had been over for months, maybe longer. I'd just been too stubborn or too scared to acknowledge it. "There's something else," Paul continued. "Something you should probably know before you make any major decisions." "What?" "I heard through the legal grapevine that Evan Miller's event planning company is in financial trouble. Serious trouble. They're being investigated for mishandling client funds." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "Are you sure?" "My source is solid. The investigation isn't public yet, but it will be soon, which makes me wonder about that job offer he made to your wife." "You think he's using her?" "I think a man whose business is about to collapse might be very interested in a woman with access to museum funds and donor information." The pieces started falling into place with sickening clarity. Serena worked in the gift shop, but she also helped with special events and had access to donor databases. She knew which patrons had money and which ones might be interested in investing in other ventures. "That snake," I said. "Indeed. Which brings me to my final piece of advice." "What's that?" Paul smiled, and for the first time since the anniversary dinner, I felt like maybe I wasn't completely powerless in this situation. "If you're going to get revenge, Arthur, make it count." The next few days passed in a blur of legal paperwork and strategic planning. I moved my money, changed my passwords, and started documenting everything with the methodical precision of a man who'd finally stopped pretending his marriage was worth saving. Serena had apparently given up trying to reach me directly and had moved on to what I can only describe as a public relations campaign. According to Maggie, who was keeping tabs on the situation through her network of bartender contacts, my wife was telling anyone who would listen that I'd had some kind of mental breakdown and abandoned her at the restaurant without explanation. The story was getting more elaborate with each telling. By Thursday, I'd apparently thrown a wine glass at Evan, screamed at the waiter, and stormed out while shouting threats. By Friday, the restaurant had supposedly banned me for life, and Serena was considering a restraining order. It was impressive, really. I'd never given Serena enough credit for her creativity, but two could play the narrative game. I spent Saturday morning at a coffee shop across the street from Evan's downtown condo building, armed with a telephoto lens and the kind of patience that comes from having absolutely nothing left to lose. Maggie had borrowed the camera equipment from her boyfriend, Rick, who worked as a freelance photographer when he wasn't bouncing at the bar. "This feels a little stalker-ish," I'd told Rick when he handed me the camera bag. "Nah, man. Stalking is when you're trying to get with someone. This is reconnaissance. Totally different thing." Rick had a point. I wasn't trying to win Serena back. I was trying to document exactly how far this thing with Evan had progressed. I didn't have to wait long. At 11:30 a.m., Serena's car pulled into the parking garage beneath Evan's building. She emerged wearing a sundress I'd never seen before and carrying an overnight bag that answered pretty much every question I'd had about the nature of their relationship. I took pictures. Lots of pictures. At 2:15 p.m. they came out together, holding hands like teenagers, and walked to a nearby cafe. More pictures. At 4:45 p.m. they returned to the building, Evan's hand on the small of Serena's back in a gesture that was intimate and possessive. Even more pictures. By the time I packed up my surveillance operation, I had enough photographic evidence to prove that my wife was having a full-blown affair, conducted in broad daylight, with absolutely no regard for discretion or my feelings. But pictures were just the beginning. That night, I paid a visit to Evan's parking garage. The building had security cameras, but they were old and poorly positioned, with several blind spots that a careful person could exploit. Not that I was planning anything illegal, of course. I just wanted to leave Evan a little message. His BMW was parked in space 23B, gleaming under the fluorescent lights like a monument to his success. It was a beautiful car, the kind of car that screamed, "I make more money than your husband," every time Serena saw it. I pulled out my phone and took a few more pictures, then got to work. The sugar in the gas tank was a myth, I'd learned from a quick internet search. It wouldn't actually damage the engine. But a potato in the exhaust pipe would make the car nearly impossible to start, and a few strategic scratches in the paint would definitely get his attention. I used my house key to carve a simple message into the driver's side door. Home wrecker. It wasn't sophisticated, but it was honest. For good measure, I let the air out of all 4 tires and left a printed note under his windshield wiper. "Enjoy the ride, lover boy. A concerned citizen." The whole operation took less than 10 minutes. I was back in my car and heading home before the security guard finished his rounds. My phone rang as I was pulling into my own parking lot. Unknown number. "Hello? You sick bastard!" Evan's voice was shaking with rage. "I know it was you. I'm sorry, who is this?" "Don't play dumb, Arthur. I've got security footage." That was interesting. If he actually had clear footage of me vandalizing his car, he would have called the police, not me. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about," I said. "But if someone damaged your car, you should probably call the police. Unless, of course, you have some reason for not wanting to involve law enforcement." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "Stay away from me and Serena," Evan finally said. "That's funny. I was about to give you the same advice about me and my wife. Your wife doesn't want to be married to you anymore. Then she should probably tell me that herself instead of sending her boyfriend to deliver the message." I hung up before he could respond. Sunday morning brought a new development. Serena finally came home, looking like she'd spent the weekend doing exactly what the photographs suggested she'd been doing. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup was smudged, and she had the slightly dazed expression of someone who'd been caught in a lie so big that she couldn't figure out how to climb out of it. "We need to talk," she said, dropping her overnight bag by the door. "I'm listening." "Evan told me what you did to his car." "What did I do to his car?" "Don't lie to me, Arthur. This isn't like you." I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and tried to remember when I'd stopped recognizing the person standing in front of me. When had she become someone who could spend the weekend with another man and then come home to lecture me about my behavior? "You're right," I said. "This isn't like me. The old me would have pretended not to notice that you're having an affair. The old me would have kept paying for anniversary dinners while you flirted with other men. The old me would have ignored the fact that you've been lying to me for months." Serena's face went pale. "I'm not having an affair." "Really? Because I have photographs that suggest otherwise." "You've been following me?" "I've been documenting the truth. There's a difference." She sat down heavily on the couch, suddenly looking older than her 38 years. "Arthur, I never meant for things to go this far." "How far have they gone, Serena?" "It's not what you think." I think you're sleeping with Evan Miller. I think you have been for months. I think the job offer is fake, and the anniversary dinner was just an excuse to humiliate me in public. Am I wrong about any of that?" She didn't answer, which was answer enough. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued. "You're going to pack your things and move in with your boyfriend. I'm filing for divorce, and if either of you tries to make this difficult for me, I'm going to make sure those photographs end up in some very interesting places. You can't blackmail us." "I'm not blackmailing anyone. I'm just promising to tell the truth about what I've witnessed. Whether that embarrasses you is entirely up to you." Serena stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to figure out when her mild-mannered husband had turned into someone she didn't recognize. The answer was simple, right around the time she'd started treating our marriage like a joke. By Monday morning, Serena had moved out, taking most of her clothes and leaving behind a forwarding address that happened to be Evan's condo building. She'd also left behind a note that was equal parts apology and justification, explaining how she'd grown apart from me and found real connection with Evan. The note went straight into the trash, but not before I photographed it for my growing collection of evidence. I spent the morning at Paul's office, officially filing for divorce and discussing strategy. The photographs I'd taken were legally obtained and clearly showed an ongoing affair. Combined with Serena's own note admitting to the relationship, we had a strong case for fault-based divorce. The good news is that Ohio recognizes adultery as grounds for divorce, Paul explained. The bad news is that it doesn't usually affect property division unless you can prove she spent marital assets on the affair. What kind of proof would I need? Hotel receipts, expensive gifts, trips, anything that shows she used your money to support the relationship. I thought about Serena's new clothes, the overnight bag, the sudden interest in expensive restaurants. I might be able to find some things. Good. In the meantime, I'd recommend staying away from any more late-night visits to parking garages. You've made your point. He was probably right, but I wasn't quite done making points yet. That afternoon, I paid a visit to the Cleveland Museum of Art, where Serena had worked for the past 3 years. I knew her schedule well enough to time my arrival for her lunch break, when she'd be away from the gift shop, but her co-workers would still be around. The museum was busy with Monday afternoon visitors, which was perfect for what I had in mind. I made my way to the gift shop and approached Sarah, the assistant manager who'd apparently been spreading rumors about Serena and Evan for months. "Arthur?" Sarah looked genuinely surprised to see me. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better," I admitted. "Actually, I was hoping you could help me with something." "Of course. What do you need?" I pulled out my phone and showed her one of the clearer photographs, Serena and Evan holding hands outside his condo building. "I was wondering if you'd ever seen them together like this." Sarah's eyes widened. "Oh my God, Arthur, I'm so sorry." "You knew?" "I suspected, but I never had proof. They've been having lunch together every week for months, always very touchy and secretive. Some of us wondered, but you didn't want to get involved. I should have said something. I feel terrible." "Don't feel terrible. Feel helpful. I need to know if Serena has been using museum resources for personal business, computer access, donor information, anything like that." Sarah glanced around nervously. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but she's been printing a lot of personal documents lately, and she's been asking weird questions about our donor database." "What kind of questions? Like who has the most money, who might be interested in investing in outside projects? She said it was for a friend who was starting a business." The pieces were falling into place exactly as Paul had predicted. Evan wasn't just stealing my wife. He was using her to access potential investors for his failing company. "Sarah, would you be willing to put that in writing for the divorce proceedings?" "Absolutely. Serena has been acting really strange lately, and if she's been using museum resources for personal gain, Ms. Grant needs to know about it." Ms. Grant was the museum director, a formidable woman in her 60s who took a dim view of employees who mixed personal and professional business. Actually, Sarah continued, you might want to talk to Ms. Grant directly. She's been asking questions about Serena's computer usage lately. This was better than I'd hoped. I found Ms. Grant in her office, reviewing what looked like personnel files. She was exactly as intimidating as Serena had always described, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, and completely no-nonsense. Mr. Jensen, she said when I knocked on her open door, I was wondering when you might come by. You were expecting me? I've been hearing some concerning rumors about your wife's conduct, both personal and professional. Please, sit down. I took the offered chair and tried to look appropriately concerned rather than vindictively satisfied. I understand you're going through some marital difficulties, Ms. Grant continued. That's one way to put it. I also understand that Serena may have been sharing confidential donor information with outside parties. I wouldn't know anything about that. I lied smoothly. But if you have concerns about professional conduct, I'd certainly want to know about them. Ms. Grant opened one of the files on her desk. Our IT department has been monitoring unusual computer activity. Serena's been accessing donor records far more frequently than her position requires, and she's been printing donor contact lists. That does sound unusual. It's also grounds for immediate termination, particularly if we can prove she's been sharing that information with unauthorized individuals. I pulled out my phone again and showed Ms. Grant the photograph of Serena and Evan. This is Evan Miller. He runs an event planning company that's apparently in financial trouble. Serena mentioned that he'd been asking her about potential investors. Ms. Grant studied the photograph with the expression of someone who'd just found a smoking gun. Mr. Jensen, would you be willing to provide a formal statement about what your wife has told you regarding Mr. Miller's business interests? Absolutely. 20 minutes later, I walked out of the museum with a copy of my signed statement and the knowledge that Serena's career was about to become as ruined as our marriage. But I wasn't finished yet. That evening, I created a group email that included Evan's business partners, several of Serena's friends, and a few key people from both of their social circles. The subject line was simple: the truth about Evan and Serena. The email was brief and factual. I'm writing to inform you that my wife, Serena Stone, has been having an affair with Evan Miller for several months. I have photographic evidence of their relationship, which has been conducted openly while they both lied to me about the nature of their friendship. I thought you should know the truth about the people you're dealing with, both personally and professionally. Attached are photographs taken this weekend. I attached 3 of the clearest photos and hit send. Then I poured myself a drink and waited for the fireworks to begin. The fireworks started at 7:23 p.m. with a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. You bastard! Serena's voice was shaking with rage. How could you send those photos to everyone we know? I only sent them to people I thought should know the truth. You've ruined everything. My job, my friendships, Evan's business. I didn't ruin anything, Serena. You did that all by yourself. I just documented it. Evan is furious. He says you've destroyed his reputation. His reputation was built on lies anyway. I just helped people see through them. You don't understand. You've made some very powerful enemies. There was something in her voice that made me pause. What does that mean? Evan knows people, Arthur. Important people. He's not going to let this go. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you. Back off, or things are going to get very bad for you. I hung up and immediately called Paul. They're threatening me, I told him. What kind of threats? Vague ones. Serena says Evan knows people and won't let this go. Document everything. Record all phone calls if you can. And Arthur? Yeah? Maybe stay somewhere else for a few nights, just until things cool down. I took Paul's advice and spent the next 2 nights at Maggie's apartment above the bar where she worked. It turned out to be a smart move, because on Wednesday evening, Evan and 2 of his friends showed up at my building. Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who lived across the hall from me, Called to let me know that 3 men had been banging on my door and demanding that I come out and face them like a man. They seemed very angry, Mrs. Chen said. I called the building manager, but they left before he arrived. Did you recognize any of them? One of them was that man who used to visit sometimes with your wife, the tall one with the expensive car. Evan. Of course. I called Detective Lila Carter, an old high school friend who worked downtown. We'd kept in touch over the years, mostly through Christmas cards and the occasional Facebook comment, but I figured she might be willing to give me some unofficial advice. Arthur Jensen, she said when she answered the phone. I was wondering when I'd hear from you. You've heard about my situation? Honey, half of Cleveland has heard about your situation. Your email made quite an impression. So, you know why I'm calling. Let me guess. Your wife's boyfriend and his friends are making threats. They showed up at my apartment tonight. My neighbor says they were pretty aggressive. Any actual violence? Not yet. Any specific threats? Just vague warnings about making enemies and not letting things go. Lila was quiet for a moment. Arthur, I'm going to give you some advice as a friend, not as a cop. These guys are probably just trying to scare you, but scared people do stupid things. Stay away from them, don't engage, and call 911 if they show up again. What about pressing charges for harassment? You'd need more evidence, but keep documenting everything, and if they escalate, we can definitely pursue it. Thursday morning brought news that made all the threats worthwhile. Paul called with an update that was better than I'd dared to hope. Serena got fired, he said without preamble. From the museum? Yesterday afternoon. Apparently your statement was the final piece of evidence they needed to prove misuse of confidential information. She's also been banned from museum property. What about Evan? Even better. 2 of his business partners pulled out after receiving your email. His company is officially bankrupt as of this morning. I felt a surge of satisfaction that was probably unhealthy, but absolutely deserved. So they're both unemployed? And unemployable, at least in Cleveland. Word is spreading fast in both of their professional circles. Good. There's more. Evan's ex-girlfriend, the one who received your email, apparently had some very interesting stories to tell about his financial habits. She's filed a complaint with the state attorney general about some money he borrowed from her and never repaid. It was almost too perfect. In the span of a week, both Serena and Evan had lost their jobs, their reputations, and their financial security. All I'd done was tell the truth about what I'd witnessed, but apparently, they weren't ready to accept responsibility for their actions. Friday evening, as I was finally returning to my own apartment, I found Evan waiting in the parking lot. He was alone this time, which was either better or worse depending on how desperate he'd become. We need to talk, he said, stepping out from behind a parked car. I don't think we do. You've destroyed my life. You destroyed your own life. I just provided documentation. Evan moved closer, and I could see that he was barely holding himself together. His expensive clothes were wrinkled, his hair was uncombed, and his eyes had the wild look of someone who'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose. Do you have any idea what you've done? He said. I'm ruined. My business is gone, my investors have pulled out, my reputation is destroyed. That's what happens when you build your life on lies and fraud. I never committed fraud. You used my wife to access confidential donor information so you could solicit investments for a company that was already bankrupt. That's fraud, Evan. I was trying to save my business by stealing my wife and exploiting her job. Very noble. Evan's face was turning red with anger. You smug little nobody. Do you think you've won something here? I think I've exposed the truth. What people do with that information is up to them. Serena never loved you, you know. She told me she married you because she felt sorry for you. The words were meant to hurt, and they did, but not in the way Evan expected. Instead of pain, I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth, even when it was ugly, was better than living with lies. That's probably true, I said. But she doesn't love you either. She was using you for money and status, just like you were using her for access to museum donors. You deserve each other. Evan lunged at me then, swinging wildly with his right fist. I'd never been much of a fighter, but desperation and anger made me faster than I expected. I ducked his punch and shoved him backward, sending him stumbling into the side of a parked car. "Stay away from me," I said. "Stay away from my building, stay away from my friends, and if you ever threaten me again, I'll make sure every newspaper in Cleveland knows exactly what kind of man you really are." Evan straightened his jacket and tried to recover some dignity, but the effect was ruined by the fact that he was breathing hard and his face was flushed with embarrassment. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is. You just haven't figured that out yet." I walked away, leaving him standing alone in the parking lot, and for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. Saturday morning brought the final piece of the puzzle, delivered by Detective Carter in the form of a phone call that changed everything I thought I knew about Evan Miller and his relationship with my wife. "Arthur, I need you to come down to the station," Lila said. "There's something you need to know about your friend Evan." "He's not my friend." Poor choice of words. Just get down here. Trust me, you're going to want to hear this. An hour later, I was sitting in Lila's office, drinking terrible police station coffee, and trying to process what she'd just told me. "Fraud?" I said. "Actual criminal fraud?" The state attorney general's office has been investigating his company for months. Turns out he was running a sophisticated Ponzi scheme, using money from new clients to pay for events he'd already booked with previous clients' funds. "How much money are we talking about?" "Nearly $500,000. He was also forging invoices, inflating costs, and pocketing the difference." I sat back in my chair, trying to absorb the magnitude of what Lila was telling me. "So, when he was courting Serena, he was looking for new victims, museum donors, wealthy patrons, anyone with money to invest in what he claimed was a rapidly expanding business. And Serena was his way in." "Exactly. We found emails on his computer outlining his plan to use her access to donor information to identify potential targets." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "He never cared about her at all." "Oh, it gets better. We also found evidence that he was planning to disappear once he'd milked the museum connections for everything he could get. There's a bank account in the Cayman Islands with nearly $200,000 in it." I thought about Serena, unemployed and living in Evan's condo, believing she'd found true love with a successful businessman. She had no idea she'd been nothing more than a tool in an elaborate con game. Where is he now? That's the interesting part. He's gone. Disappeared sometime Thursday night, right after your little confrontation in the parking lot. His condo is empty, his car is gone, and he cleaned out his local bank accounts. What about Serena? She's been calling us every hour since yesterday morning, claiming he was supposed to pick her up for a weekend trip to Chicago. Apparently, he told her he had some important business meetings lined up. The irony was almost too perfect. Serena had betrayed me for a man who'd been planning to betray her from the very beginning. She'd destroyed our marriage for someone who'd seen her as nothing more than a means to an end. Is she in trouble legally? That depends. If she knowingly provided confidential information to help him defraud people, yes. If she was just a naive accomplice who didn't understand what he was really doing, probably not. I thought about my wife, ex-wife technically, since the divorce papers had been filed, sitting alone in an empty condo, waiting for a man who was never coming back. Part of me felt sorry for her, a very small part. "There's one more thing," Lila continued. "We found something else on his computer, something you're definitely going to want to see." She turned her monitor around so I could see the screen. It was an email thread between Evan and someone named Marcus, discussing what they called the Jensen situation. The emails were dated from the previous week, right after I'd sent the photographs to their mutual contacts. From Evan Miller to Marcus Webb. Subject: Problem. The husband is becoming a serious issue. He's got photos and he's not backing down. We need to handle this before he ruins everything. From Marcus Webb to Evan Miller. Subject, problem. How do you want to handle it? I can arrange for him to have an accident. Make it look like a mugging gone wrong. From Evan Miller to Marcus Webb. Subject, problem. Let me try talking to him first. If that doesn't work, we'll consider other options. I stared at the screen. He was planning to have me eliminated? It looks that way. Marcus Webb is a known associate with a record for assault and extortion. We're looking for him too, but he's also disappeared. The full scope of what I'd stumbled into was finally becoming clear. This wasn't just about a cheating wife and her boyfriend. I'd accidentally exposed a major fraud operation, and they'd been prepared to eliminate me to protect it. So, when Evan confronted me in the parking lot, he was probably trying to gauge whether you were going to be a continued threat. When you made it clear you weren't backing down, he decided to cut his losses and run, taking all the money with him. Every penny he could get his hands on. I thought about Serena again, and this time the sympathy was stronger. She'd been used just as thoroughly as I had, maybe more so. The difference was that I'd figured it out in time to protect myself. What happens now? Now we try to find Evan Miller and Marcus Webb, though they're probably long gone by now. We'll recover what money we can for the victims, but most of it is probably offshore where we can't touch it. And Serena? That's up to you. She's going to need a lawyer, and she's probably going to need someone to help her figure out what to do next. I stood up to leave, my head spinning with everything I'd learned. At the door, I turned back to Lila. Can I ask you something? Sure. If I hadn't sent those emails, if I hadn't exposed the affair, how long do you think this would have gone on? Lila considered the question. Based on what we found on his computer, he was probably planning to disappear within the next month anyway, with or without your wife. So she would have been left with nothing either way. Worse than nothing. She would have been left holding the bag for all of his crimes. I walked out of the police station and sat in my car for a long time, trying to decide what to do with this information. I could leave Serena to figure things out on her own. After all, she'd made her choices and would have to live with the consequences. Or I could do something that the old Arthur never would have considered. I could help her. Not because I wanted to reconcile, and not because I forgave her for what she'd done to our marriage, but because she was about to face the biggest crisis of her life, and despite everything that had happened between us, I wasn't the kind of person who could walk away from someone who needed help, even if that someone was the woman who'd broken my heart. I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. Arthur? Her voice was small and frightened. I can't believe you're calling me. Serena, we need to talk. There are some things about Evan that you need to know. He's missing, Arthur. He was supposed to pick me up yesterday and he never showed up. His phone goes straight to voicemail. I know. Can you meet me somewhere? Somewhere public? Why would you want to help me? After everything I've done? It was a good question, and I wasn't entirely sure of the answer myself. Because despite everything that's happened between us, I'm not the kind of person who leaves someone to face a crisis alone, even when they probably deserve it. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. There's a coffee shop on East 4th Street, she finally said, near the museum. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Arthur? Yeah? Thank you. I hung up and started the car, wondering if I was making a huge mistake or finally doing something right. The coffee shop was nearly empty when I arrived, just a few students with laptops and an elderly man reading a newspaper. Serena was already there, sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a mug like she was trying to absorb its warmth. She looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes were wrinkled, and her eyes were red from crying. This wasn't the confident, beautiful woman who'd flirted with Evan at our anniversary dinner. This was someone who'd had her entire world collapse in the span of a week. Thank you for coming, she said when I sat down across from her. How are you holding up? I'm not really. I don't understand what happened. Evan said we were going to Chicago, that he had meetings with potential investors. He was supposed to pick me up at 9 yesterday morning, and he just disappeared. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screenshots of Evan's emails that Lila had sent me. Serena, Evan Miller was running a fraud operation. He's stolen nearly $500,000 from clients, and he's been using you to access museum donor information so he could find new victims. She read the emails in silence, her face growing paler with each line. "This can't be real," she whispered. "It's real. The police have been investigating him for months. He's gone, Serena. He took all the money and disappeared, probably to a country that doesn't extradite to the United States. But he loved me." "No, he didn't. He used you, just like he used everyone else." She started crying then, not the delicate tears of someone seeking sympathy, but the raw, ugly sobs of someone whose entire reality had just been shattered. "I've lost everything," she said between sobs. "My job, my home, my friends, and it was all for nothing." "You haven't lost everything." "What do I have left?" It was a fair question. Her career was over, her reputation was destroyed, and she was probably going to face legal consequences for her role in Evan's scheme, even if she hadn't known what he was really doing. "You have the truth," I said, "and you have the chance to start over." "How can I start over? Everyone knows what I did. Everyone knows I cheated on you, that I got fired from my job. Everyone also knows that you were the victim of a con man who stole $500,000 and disappeared. That's going to buy you more sympathy than you think." She looked up at me with something that might have been hope. "Do you really think so? I think people love a redemption story, and I think you're going to need a good lawyer." "I can't afford a lawyer." "I can." She stared at me like I'd just spoken in a foreign language. "Why would you do that?" "Because despite everything that's happened, I don't want to see you go to prison for something you didn't fully understand you were doing." "Arthur, I don't deserve your help." "Probably not, but I'm offering it anyway." We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us trying to process the surreal nature of the conversation. 6 months ago, we'd been married. 2 weeks ago, she'd been cheating on me. Now, I was offering to pay for her legal defense. "What happens to us?" she finally asked. "There is no us, Serena. That ended when you chose Evan over our marriage. But that doesn't mean I want to see you destroyed. I'm sorry, for all of it. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. I believe you. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me?" I considered the question. A week ago, the answer would have been an automatic no. But sitting across from her now, seeing how completely her world had collapsed, I found that most of my anger had been replaced by something else. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of tired acceptance. "I think I already have," I said. "Not because you deserve it, but because holding on to anger was making me into someone I didn't recognize." "What will you do now?" "I'm going to finish the divorce proceedings. I'm going to rebuild my business. I'm going to figure out how to be happy on my own." "And me?" "You're going to get a good lawyer, cooperate with the police investigation, and hope that the prosecutor believes you were as much a victim as anyone else. Then you're going to figure out how to rebuild your life somewhere that isn't Cleveland." She nodded, accepting the reality of her situation with a grace I hadn't expected. "Arthur?" "Yeah? For what it's worth, I did love you. Maybe not the way I should have, and maybe not enough to keep me from making terrible decisions, but I did love you." "I know. I loved you too." Past tense? Past tense. I left her sitting in the coffee shop and walked out into the Cleveland afternoon, feeling lighter than I had in months. The divorce would be finalized within a few weeks. Serena would probably avoid jail time, but would likely face years of financial and legal consequences for her role in Evan's scheme. Evan himself would probably never be caught, living somewhere tropical on stolen money. But I was free. Free from a marriage that had been built on different expectations and incompatible dreams. Free from the anger and resentment that had been eating away at me for months. Free to figure out who I was when I wasn't trying to be someone else's idea of a successful husband. My phone buzzed with a text from Maggie. "How did it go?" I typed back, "Better than expected. Want to grab dinner?" "Always. Rick's cooking at the bar tonight, his famous chili." "Perfect. See you at 7. I put my phone away and started walking toward my car, already thinking about the future instead of the past. There would be challenges ahead, rebuilding my business, navigating the divorce proceedings, figuring out how to trust someone again someday. But for the first time in months, those challenges felt like opportunities rather than obstacles. Behind me, through the coffee shop window, I could see Serena still sitting at our table, staring at her phone like she was trying to figure out who to call for help. Part of me wanted to go back and offer more assistance, but I knew that would be a mistake. She needed to figure out her own path forward, just like I was figuring out mine. I got in my car and drove toward my sister's bar, where people who cared about me were waiting with good food and honest conversation. It wasn't the life I'd planned 6 months ago, but it was real in a way that my marriage never had been. And sometimes, real was better than perfect. As I pulled into the parking lot behind Maggie's bar, I realized that revenge wasn't about destroying your enemies. It was about building a life so good that their opinions stopped mattering. Serena and Evan had lost everything they'd thought was important: money, status, reputation, security. But I'd gained something more valuable: the knowledge that I could survive anything, even the complete destruction of everything I'd thought I wanted. I walked into the bar, where Maggie was waiting with a beer and a smile, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged.